So a few weeks ago on a Thursday afternoon, Erin hit me up. We wanted to get a ride in and we decided to do something different. So I rode over to her house and then we decided to hop into her car and head out to the Bedford Reservation and ride their mountain bike trails. We had never ridden them, so we decided to head out and try it for the first time. About a 25-minute drive out for us. And I actually have Erin with me today because we're going to talk about what our experience was like out there.
So like Tim said, we had never been there, and when we talked about it in the morning, he mentioned something that had been mentioned to us before, that if you want to ride all of the trails out there, it's better to have a route or a map because the trails are interspersed throughout the park and not contiguous. So during an early afternoon rest, I was just laying in bed and pulled up Strava, and their app map feature will suggest routes in your vicinity. And so I just centered the map on Bedford, and a full map of all of the trails was the first thing that came up. So that ended up being pretty easy.
Yeah, and when we were out there, when you're on the trail, you don't need to worry about where you're going. Like you see us riding right here, it's single track, you're just following the single track. The thing that happens is it crosses over the hiking paths, the jogging path, and even the roads. And that's kind of where when you jump out on like the bike path, which is the bike path we had ridden before, just a paved one in Bedford Reservation, you would just it would be hard to always notice where it turns off to hit the next loop, because it's kind of like Bedford, when you say it was a series of six loops maybe off the paths?
I think it may have even been more than that, but definitely at least 6.
Yeah, so it's just one of those things. I feel like if you went out there and just tried to follow the signs and ride the whole thing, you would definitely miss a few loops. So all this to say, we do have the Strava link below if you want to download a route. I just think it's advisable if you have a bike computer to do that too, if you're trying to hit everything and you've never been here before. And speaking of that, hitting everything here, which I believe we did, we ended up with a little over 12 miles and a little over 800 feet of elevation.
Our starting point was relatively arbitrary. It was the parking area trailhead that the route started at, and that just seemed easy. It was probably also geographically the easiest parking lot for us to go to. It's not necessarily where I would want to start if I were doing it again, or where I might recommend people start. You started by climbing, and a little slightly technical. So I just wasn't mentally or physically warmed up yet.
And just what you see on screen there, we were putting a foot down. They're just some uphill, rocky stuff. And so the beginning, the first loop was much more almost like West Branch, or a little more old school, a little rougher, rooty, rocky, and would be better suited for true mountain bikes. I'm riding my Gunnar, so I'm riding full rigid with 55s. You're riding your
Salsa Timberjack,
so you're running front suspension and wider true mountain bike tires.
Yeah, earlier in the summer, I had thought about riding the Bombora up there and riding these trails, which you can do from the bike and hike. And I'm glad I didn't do that. It would have been too many miles for squeezing 12 miles of mountain biking in the middle. And I'm glad I had the Timberjack for these trails too.
And that being said, there were other certain loops that look like this looks here, where it's almost just as fast as you could pedal. I described it as a ride in the woods for the most part in certain spots, but it is varied. And you can also see there's lots of those cool wooden bridges, which I think is kind of one of the defining features of this mountain bike trail.
Like Tim said, the loops within the reservation varied between more flowy and more technical. And I think that you could, if you went multiple times, you could create a route. Like if you have a strong preference for flow, or particularly feeling flow that day versus technical things, you could connect the ones that are more flowy or the ones that are more technical, whatever you're feeling or what your preference is. I really struggle with the loop and trail names. So I'm sure that on the more mountain bike specific riding apps, that you could also find a route there. And those apps also really help me remember the names of the loops and the trails. I've used those mostly when we've gone to Jake's Rocks, but otherwise it just all meshes into one for me.
Yeah, so just hard to remember if you were trying to put together a route and only had done it once, which ones were the flowier ones like this versus that previous clip where you were seeing some of the more, not quite rock gardens, but definitely rocky, definitely placed there kind of rock things. I guess easy rock gardens compared to something like East Rim. I don't think there was rock gardens that were like that level out here at Bedford.
No, and I think that was one of the interesting things about this trail is that riding Hampton and East Rim mostly, those are both managed, like Hampton's managed by the Metro Parks, East Rim is managed by the National Park Service, but primarily maintained by volunteers. This trail system, I think Canva does the maintenance on, which is Canva is the Cleveland Area Mountain Bike Association, I think. And so to me, it was most reminiscent of when we went to West Branch, which is also like a Canva managed and maintained trail system. So I thought that was really interesting. Like, I don't have enough experience mountain biking to really know like any technical terminology about styles or this or that or the other thing, but I felt like it made sense to me when I realized this was Canva because it was so reminiscent of West Branch in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think a lot of the loops too, like so far we've shown the rocks, but it was more rooty, like West Branch is pretty rooty, but you could see here there's long stretches where there isn't any kind of features. So I do think you could also come out here pretty underbiked. I think you could jump off the trail and ride this. Right when I say that, you could see the roots and stuff here. It just wouldn't be as comfortable, but you can do it on, something in the 40 millimeter tires. You just might either put a foot down or just, you'd be getting shaken around a lot more. But it's not undoable. And here you see us coming out onto the bike path before we re-enter onto another loop.
That brief stop just seconds ago, reminded me that this is a one-way loop system. It doesn't like switch by days, or did it switch by days?
I didn't see any signage. I think it's all one way, and I don't know if they switch it over the years or if it's always one way. I actually don't know that information, but head in the direction you're supposed to. There are signs.
It's very well signed, so you shouldn't have any trouble with that.
Even when you come off the trail, which I was saying, like the bike path, I mean, where you sometimes might have to look a little bit if you didn't have it mapped for where it goes, there are arrows and signs pointing to, mountain bikes. It tells you where, hikers only. That's the other thing. This is a shared trail with hikers, and we did pass a few. I'm not really sure why you'd want to hike this with other better hiking trails around in the Bedford Reservation, but you do have to be a little bit aware that there could be someone out there walking.
Also, it intersected and maybe even conjoined a little bit with some bridle trails. So we went on a Thursday, like late afternoon, or probably on the trails, like when people were getting out of work. So not the highest traffic time. I think the walkers and the horses are definitely something to be more aware of if you're going, over the weekend or more into those evening hours.
I found the overall pace of the riding to be a little bit more like old school mountain bike trails because it's very just up and down and flat for a while, but there's not like any major hills. There's a couple little sections where you can get going just by coasting, but much more relatable to West Branch and old school stuff than I would say East Rim or Hampton around here, where there's like some real big drops where you really get going. It's mostly pedal power. We did see some skilled mountain bikers out there like really moving pretty good though.
Yeah, I would venture to guess that was absolutely not their first time on these trails. I think I'd really like to ride it again from the perspective of, like, I get nervous whenever I'm doing a trail for the first time and don't know what to expect, and so mentally acclimating, I feel like, takes some of the fun out of it at the beginning. After a while, I was having a good time, but I'd like to ride it again, like knowing more what to expect going into it.
It's interesting to hear you say that because I was thinking during probably like the first quarter of our ride, I'm like, I don't know if this would be worth driving back here to ride again. I was like, if I rode out, because we do ride out this way, down those bike paths. I was like, maybe I'd hop on and ride a couple loops here or there. But then same thing, as we got more and more into it, I was like, I would come back here and ride this again and try it more.
Yeah, definitely.
Doing pretty good.
Well, I don't know. Now that for a first timer, I would say don't start where we started. But I don't know that I would care that much going back and knowing that I'm going to start by climbing.
Yeah, you're going to start by climbing on rougher stuff, but it's going to smooth out, and we're going to have some faster going stuff that's a little more fun to ride, at least in our opinion. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are bringing more capable mountain bikes and are more skilled and don't mind those uphill, like rocky sections at all.
Yeah.
So after riding all the trails here, you've been mountain biking much more than I have this summer, but last summer we did a lot in our area. We've traveled around and done some other mountain bike trails now over the few years you've been mountain biking. In the spectrum of, we don't do extreme downhill, so, forget that. But we've done the super rocky, super technical, slow going New England stuff. On a scale of like beginner to, I don't know, experienced, black diamond, whatever, how would you consider these trails?
I think it probably depends on how, I don't know. I guess I feel like if you've never been mountain biking before and somebody asked me where should you go, I'd send them to Hampton, right? If they're, if they live in Bedford, go do a couple loops. Maybe start with the flowier ones, because these are definitely, the loops are shorter, so if you make a certain turn at Hampton, you're going to be out there for longer than you'd be on these four. So these,
you could bail on.
Yeah, these are more bite-sized options where if you do feel like you're in over your head,
right there, you could jump out on the road and
right
head back to where you're parked.
Yeah,
which we saw people doing.
The more technical stuff isn't that technical, and again, don't be like, I want to try mountain biking and take your road bike on these trails. You're absolutely not going to have a good time.
Yeah.
But you could underbike it on a gravel bike, maybe with some wider tires, and get a good feel for it. You'd be fine. If you have a hardtail or full suspension, you'll be perfectly fine. Nothing is so technical that you'd be concerned for your safety or anything.
Yeah, you could
that.
always slow down here. There's no hidden drops. You're not going to come around a corner and then have it drop you off a ramp like, a mountain bike park would. There's, Hampton, the first couple times you do it, the top loop is fairly smooth and simple, but then you go to the big part. And the first time I went down Hampton, it felt steep and fast, and the bank turn scared me a little bit. Whereas there's nothing like that here. I do think you could jump out on this, and if it was too rough or you just felt uncomfortable, you'd be able to bail pretty easily. So this is, I guess, probably fairly beginner friendly.
Yeah.
One other thing I liked about this trail a lot, and it's very hard to capture with a GoPro, but there were sections where we were riding along the edge of the ravine down to the creek, and you could see really cool ravine views, and it was a really pretty trail. And as I mentioned, all the bridges, just tons of bridges, were really unique. So I do think it has a element of that where some trails don't really have a lot of scenery. I feel like this one kind of did. Also, I could imagine this would be really pretty in the fall, and the views would be better too when some of the leaves are gone.
Overall, I'm really glad we went. There are still, other than this one, which we've now been to, a handful of mountain bike trails in the area that we haven't been to. So this was nice to do something different and kind of get a fuller picture of what our options are in the area. It's funny because I feel like we'll plan a trip to drive farther away and do stuff, but it's 20 minutes away. It took us 2 years to go here. I'm curious about for other people, is it, easier or harder to do the 20-minute drive than a 2-hour drive, or, what's going to make a short drive enticing to somebody? I don't know. Maybe also people aren't quite as trying to ride everywhere or make the most of a trip as we are. Is 12 miles not enough, of a dopamine hit to motivate you for that drive? Or is 20 minutes not a drive for you? I mean, but we both work at home and don't commute, so that seems like a far drive.
Yeah, maybe we're just spoiled that there are mountain bike trails around, and I, will ride to Hampton because it doesn't take me that long to get there, and I even will ride to East Rim. So I don't know, maybe our perspective's totally different on whether it's worth driving to a place like this to get a mountain bike ride in or not.
I guess if anybody has any thoughts and preferences on trail style or, whether they like to drive to trails near or far, I'd be interested in reading them. I don't necessarily comment a lot, but I'm very much a comment lurker. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah, and I think like some of the drives we've done in the last couple of years up by Ann Arbor, we were making a trip out of that. The DT trails I thought were totally worth it. I love those kind of trails, fast, flowy. Same with when I went down to Athens about a year ago to ride the Baileys. That's somewhere I want to go back and, again, but 3.5 hour drive, but absolutely loved it. And again, those are two much more extensive systems though. So you're getting a whole day of riding out of going there. So yeah, let us know what you think down below. Give this video a like. I want to say real quick, I do appreciate all the comments on the last video. I loved hearing all the stories of how people got into cycling and what their first bike was and just the different way they ride and who they become as cyclists. Also check out our little store down below or consider becoming a channel member if you want to support this channel a little more. I appreciate it. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Bye-bye.